Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Backstage with Builders podcast. Today, with me, I have a fintech operations professional with over 7 years of experience across payment aggregators, banks, and global payment companies, Vishal Sharma. Vishal has worked with big names like ZachPay by MobiKwik, PayU, Worldline, and HDFC Bank. And he currently manages merchant onboarding operations at ZachPay. His work sits at the intersection of regulations, technology, and operation, covering onboarding, risk, banking, operation, and compliance alignment, all with the single focus of building systems that scale reliably and sustainably. Okay, thank you so much for joining the podcast, Vishal. I've already given you a good brief introduction, so I'll just jump into the first question that I prepared for you. You've worked across banks, payment aggregators, and global payment companies. How did your journey into this fintech's operations even begin?
First of all, Akhil, thank you so much for inviting me here. To be very frank, I didn't plan fintech operations. Fintech operations choose me. I started in banking where I learned discipline and compliance. And when I moved into payments, I realized that operations is where real decisions happen.
Hmm.
Risk, scalability, trust over time across PayU, Worldline, SDFC Bank, and now with ZachPay. I saw one thing clearly. Product promise, but operations delivers.
Hmm.
So overall, if you talk about operations is where strategy meets reality.
True.
So that was the reason here I am.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. And one thing with operations that I've personally seen, it's all almost invisible compared to usually like product or growth, right? There's KPIs and such with that. Is there anything that you like specifically about operations because of that?
As I told you now, ops
Mm.
doesn't seek spotlight, but it
Mm.
decides the survival of the fintech industry.
Mm.
If you are very specific about the fintech industry now,
Mm.
ops doesn't seek spotlight, but it decides the survival. So
That
that
makes sense.
was the reason I always wanted to work and learn here.
So it's almost like a foundation, basically,
Correct.
for a company, right? No, that makes sense. And currently, you're working at ZachPay, right? And it operates as like a payment RBI approved payment aggregator, right? From an operation lens, what does seamless payment actually require behind the scene?
Seamless payments are anything but seamless internally.
Okay.
They require bank coordination, NPCI dependencies, reconciliation accuracy, fraud monitoring, compliance check, and all working together. One broken link and the instant payment story collapses.
Hmm.
So, if you summarize this in one line, seamless is engineered, not accidental.
Hmm.
That is overall my thought is all about the seamless payments.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And everything in this space, I feel like is interconnected, right? So if one thing breaks, like everything, like you said, like it keeps on breaking and breaking, right? And you also handle like merchant onboarding, right? Which sounds like very simple on the surface, but I know that whatever is simple is never simple behind the scenes, right? So what are like some of the hardest part that, according to you, or like what you have seen of onboarding at scale, that most founders don't even anticipate that are building in this space?
The hardest part of onboarding is not the CDD or KYC.
Okay.
It's judgment. Founders understand the edge cases, complex business models, evolving use cases, sudden volume spikes, or regulatory red flags
Hmm.
that don't show up on day one. At
Hmm.
scale onboarding, bad onboarding decisions don't fail immediately. They fail loudly later.
Okay. That
So
makes
that are all the reasons when we are onboarding any of the merchant now, we are
sense.
very cautious. Is there anything which is getting shown to us now? We don't need to see that only. We
Hmm.
want to see what is not getting shown to us
Okay.
because there is something which is happening in the background and that is getting hidden by the merchant intentionally so that
Hmm.
they get onboarded and do whatever they want to do, whether that is AML, whether that is terrorist funding, or any kind of that things can be happen in background, which we need to do the enhanced due diligence so that we can identify what are the actual intention of the merchant who wants a payment system for their ecosystem.
No, that makes sense. And then expanding a bit on this, because you brought up like a really good point. There are always like risks when it comes to it, right? And you handle both pre and post onboarding risks, right? Are there like any issues that usually surface when a merchant is already live now on the platform?
So in that situation, what happens generally now?
Mm.
The merchant generates the chargeback, settlement disputes get generated, suspicious transaction patterns, sudden category drift, or regulatory misalignment. Many risks only appear once real money starts flowing. That's
Okay.
why post onboarding monitoring is just as critical as onboarding itself.
Okay.
So, go live is not the finish line, it's the starting gun.
So you might even also select the post onboarding is when the actual work now begins basically for.
So, I cannot tell
Yeah.
you exactly what we do in that kind of scenarios
Yeah.
because that is something which we generally don't public.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, yeah.
So there are few patterns which we need to identify what is exactly happening.
Hmm.
And pardon for not sharing that with you
No, 100% makes sense. Yeah.
because there are peoples who misuse those things.
Hmm.
That are the only things which are patterns through which we may identify, because online payment system is not something which can be streamlined in something, so because of which boundaries of it cannot be decided ever.
That makes sense. No, that makes perfect sense. And I mean, always better to be safe, right? I'm sorry. So that makes sense. But the one thing I could relate to this, like while I was looking into more like payments, onboarding, and everything else, right? I feel like some people could also look at it as like an operational bottleneck where they want to just quickly do things, right? But founders realizes later that it could also backfire, right? In your experience, has there been like a one like operational bottleneck in payments that actually slows down growth more than founders realize?
If I will be very specific with the payment industry or the with bank, there are bank dependency. No matter how great your product is, banks still control settlement, TIDs, downtimes are there, and there are multiple NPCIs dependency, and approvals needs to be taken.
Right.
Founders often design for growth before designing for bank realities.
Hmm.
So in payments, scale moves at the speed of your slowest bank dependency.
Okay, okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. So bank partners have to be like good for that,
Correct.
right?
Because in ecosystem of the payments now, there is not
Hmm.
only payment aggregator or payment gateway is working. There are multiple layers are there.
Hmm.
Banks are there, acquiring bank, issuing bank. After that, Visa, master schemes, which we collated in a word, which we call scheme. There are
Hmm.
schemes who facilitates the payment from the acquirer to issuing bank to acquirer bank. There are multiple things which happens, which you see in a second payment gets done, but if you see in an ecosystem, there are multiple layers which are working in background.
That we don't even see, basically. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. And considering your experience, because when I was going through it, you have worked with PayU, Worldline, HDFC Bank, and now ZachPay, right? You've worked with basically both fintechs and banks. Like, what's the biggest difference that you see when it comes to them, when it comes to banks and fintech when they approach operations?
So if you talk about banks prioritize control first, scale later.
Okay.
Fintechs prioritize scale first, then learn control the hard way. The sweet spot is combining bank grade discipline with fintech agility. That's where sustainability growth happens. So I would say speed without control is risk. Control without speed is stagnation.
Ah, okay. That's a good way of putting it. Actually a good way of putting it. I like that. I like that. Now, speaking completely on the scale part of it, right? Since we are already speaking about that, processes often break, right? Like there's no one process that would stand the test of time, right? Something usually breaks, something might go wrong. Is there a sign that a payment company has outgrown its existing like operations?
Okay, so when manual workarounds become business as usual,
Mm-hmm.
which we also call BAU, if exceptions are the norm, teams are the firefighting daily, and leadership depends on individual instead of systems, it's already overdue for an ops redesign.
Mm-hmm.
So overall, I see it as if ops depends on people, not processes, scale is fragile.
Okay. So like we have to like move away from generally like people and move from towards like actual like good systems that we can have, right? That makes sense. That makes sense. Then changing like lanes a little bit. You might know because you have worked in compliance and also like risk. Payments is one of the most regulated spaces in India, right? How do you translate that when it comes to RBI regulations that are coming out or circulars that are coming out every week, every month, right? Into everyday like operational workflows? How does that? come into the whole thing?
To be very frank, one of my senior always used to say, what is not written in RBI, that needs to be performed by us, because everything cannot be document.
True.
Regulations are not documents, they are operating instructions. We break RBI guidelines into SOPs,
Mhm.
standard operating procedures, system checks, approval, metrics, audit trails, and monitoring dashboard. Compliance fails when
Mm.
it leaves only in PDFs.
Mm.
So if compliance isn't operationalized, it's just a theoretical.
Okay, that makes sense. It is something that should be followed rather than just read and move on, right? It should be
Right.
executed after RBI has said something, basically, which is where
So
SOPs also play. That makes
as I told you, whatever is not written in RBI guideline comes under the enhanced due diligence, which we, as you also know, there are
sense.
startups which are coming with new ideas. So
Mm.
what they are doing, how they are going to process the payment, how they are going to deliver the product, how we are going to manage that payments cannot be designed in a way, or it cannot be predefined that system will only work like this only.
Mm.
So in that situation, we have to also understand the business model of the merchant, how payments will be driven from here to there. That needs to be understood. And those are the reasons because of which we cannot stick to RBI guideline only.
Mm.
We have to do things beyond the RBI guidelines as well.
No, that makes sense. Like doing your own due diligence, looking at what best practices are,
That is already
right?
predefined by RBI what
Mm.
needs to be done.
No, that
But
makes sense.
what are needs to be done, that needs to be decided by us only.
Us only. That makes perfect sense. And you mentioned about like the startups and new founders, right? Is there anything that you see these new founders or like early fintech teams basically most commonly like misunderstand about payment aggregator compliances?
They always think just about a document. We have
Mm.
already provided the document.
Yeah.
Whatever is written on their website, that needs to be copy pasted from somewhere else,
Yeah, that's so
already
cool.
getting done. But actually, we need to read that policies, whether what are the things written. Some of the time we have seen in Hindi there is a quote, "नकल करने के लिए भी अकल चाहिए होती है."
Akal chahiye. Yeah.
So what they do, they copy content from some other website and paste it,
Hmm.
which is actually not aligning with their business model.
Hmm. True.
So in that scenario, we have to read that policies as well. What are the refund policies? What are the delivery policies which are mentioned on the website? Like if you do a transaction, you are doing a transaction, and when you are not getting the product, you always start searching about the policies. What are the policies of getting my funds back to me?
Yeah.
So in that situation, if payment is not getting refunded by the merchant, then you will only go and approach the aggregator or the payment gateway that these are my funds which are transferred to the merchant, but the services or the goods which was promised is not delivered to me. In that situation, they analyze what is the thing which has happened. So in that situation, rebuttals and other things are
Yeah.
getting asked, and refunds are getting generated for the person who is raising the refunds.
No, that makes sense. But I see it very common though, like you said, like they do copy a lot of things that they don't understand and they agree to things that they didn't even know that they are agreeing to, right?
Correct.
And I feel like they just do that because they think speed is everything, right?
Correct.
Like they want to be fast. Then in your experience, right, changing it a little bit, how do you balance like speed of onboarding merchants with like regulatory expectations, especially when business teams are like pushing to go faster, like live, or like investors are saying, "Oh, we need this live ASAP."
All things, Akhil, to be very frank, can be controlled through API.
Mm.
But at last, there should be someone or agent or a manual intervention is required as a checker whether the things which is approved or passed by the APIs are actually like that only or not. Because you also know, as soon as some pictures gets drawn that these are the boundary lines and these are the things which needs to be done by you on immediate basis, there are some fraudster and all who always run and see what are the loopholes which can be
Yeah.
cracked, so they also learn from them. So
Mm.
in that situation everything cannot be automated,
Yeah, true.
AI or something. There is manual intervention will always be required if you talk about the payments,
Mm.
because a small glitch or small mistake can lead to huge reputational loss,
Hmm.
financial loss, or even as a country as well.
No, that makes sense. And also, like a lot of these things, like they take such a long time to build in the public, like reputation, for example, right? And since we are dealing with payments, like once you lose that reputation, it's so hard to build that back up because otherwise it's like wildfire. People won't trust you anymore.
That will not only affect on your reputation and other things,
Yeah.
it will directly impact you as a regulatory non-compliant,
Yeah.
because of
True.
which your driving license, which we call as a RBI license
Yeah.
for driving. If I summarize all of these things now, I always used to say to my people that if you want to onboard your merchant very fastly, you want to drive your vehicle at very fast speed. But
Mm.
we, as an operational person, we always ensure that your license should be with you in all of the circumstances, so that you can drive instead of walking. You can drive,
No, that
and
makes sense.
you speed up, but that is not allowed as per the regulations is getting control in India.
No, that makes sense. I think people do confuse like speed versus rushing, right? So they rush through the thing and that just causes them issue. Then speaking in this particular instance, right? You have a lot of experience in this space. From your experience, then what's one compliance decision that if ignored early, it could be extremely painful for these new fintech companies later?
Okay. Poor merchant categorization and weak risk scoring at onboarding. It looks harmless initially,
Hmm.
but later it affects audits, confidence, and even business continuity.
Ah,
So,
okay.
risk ignored early compounds silently.
Yeah, true. That is true. Because it does pile up, right? They say, like, okay, take small steps and you will grow. And it's the same with risk. If you ignore small risk, they will grow, right? It just adds in on the both sides. That makes sense. That makes sense. That's so cool to learn, though. But another thing I have for you is like RBI guidelines, obviously, in India, they are always evolving, right? They are always updating every week, every month. There is something new, right? On fintechs. So, what should founders that are building in payments should be extra careful right now in 2026?
To be very frank, I'm not experienced that much, but as far as I think about it, data flows, merchant
Okay.
fund handling, transparency, and audit readiness. RBI scrutiny today is about intent plus execution. Good
Yeah.
governance is no longer optional, it's competitive advantage.
Mhm.
So trust is the new growth lever, which
Mm.
we should always be careful about.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Intent and execution both are important, right? You can't just say, "Oh, I wanted to do this," but if they check your action, you haven't done anything to prove that, right? And law always looks at both of them. That makes sense. But then, speaking something like in your experience, because you have worked in operations for such a long time, is there like an operational lesson that you learned the hard way that you just that changed the way you just look at work today?
So, what I had learned so far in operations, never build processes assuming ideal behavior.
Okay.
Always design the failure scenarios because they will happen.
Hmm.
Resilient ops isn't pessimism,
Hmm.
it's what we say preparedness.
Hmm.
So, in that situation, hope is not an operational strategy.
True. That makes so like being proactive, being assuming things will go wrong, being prepared for those things, right? People might call it like pessimistic, like you are being negative, but you are just being prepared while doing that, essentially, right? And that's I feel like a lot of people just look at it like optimism quite a bit, but then they start ignoring the things that could potentially happen. So they stop being realistic
Correct.
because of that, right? No, that makes sense. And looking ahead in this year, like 2026, how do you see like operations evolving in the this India's fintech ecosystem?
So, this is very good question because it also finalizes my career as well in this. So I'll move from back-end support to strategic leadership. Future
Okay.
ops leaders will shape product decisions, risk appetite, and the regulatory strategy, not just execution. The next fintech leaders will come from apps only.
Okay, okay. Because they understand everything, right? Back end, front end, and everything. No, that makes perfect sense.
They
Then, yeah.
know inputs and outputs in between, what is happening, what are the background system which are working, so they know how to do the things, how to handle the things. In that situation, fintech leaders will come from operations for sure in future.
No, no. Is that also you suggesting that you'll be building something of your own in the future?
Um,
Is
maybe,
that a sneak peek? Yeah, that could be a good thing. That could be a good thing, you know. No,
I'm
that makes,
also
yeah,
uh,
that's good though.
but yeah,
Yeah,
surely I will be interested to do these things, and I am.
that makes sense. That's good though. I like that. Then final question for you is keeping it general, keeping it very general for you. It's like, if you could give one final piece of advice to anyone, any founders building in the payments or fintech space, what it would be. Like, it doesn't have to be operational, it doesn't have to be legal. It's just a general advice, something that you always wanted to share with these founders.
So, what I understand, don't treat operations as a cost center.
Hmm.
Treat them as a foundations.
Hmm.
Growth built on weak foundations doesn't scale, it collapses. So build fast, but build responsibly. Payments remember every mistakes.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. And if you have a weak foundation, then you can never scale no matter
Okay.
what you do. Right. Thank you so much, Vishal. That was amazing. I'll have everything in relation to Vishal, his LinkedIn, his the website, Zakpay, and everything else in the description. And thank you so much again for sharing your operation side. Is something I feel like I haven't spoken to anyone about. And it's like one of the core key pillars, I could say, even for the fintech space. So thank you so much for sharing your experience in this space, Vishal. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Same here. Thank you for having me.